They are known as the Twin Cities, but when it comes to how some view law enforcement, Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota, cannot be further apart. In 2020, America witnessed tragedy unfold in Minneapolis, triggering weeks of riots and civil unrest. Just a few miles to the east, the St. Paul police chief refused to allow one incident be used to define our profession. On this episode of The Blue View, we're joined by Todd Axtell, chief of police of the city of St. Paul, Minnesota, where he leads an agency of 820 employees. As the oldest police department in the state, the St. Paul Police Department has become known for delivering trusted service and with respect every day without exception. Chief Axtell's Bank of Trust philosophy, one which views every call for service, conversation, and community interaction as an opportunity to make a deposit. The department has been able to maintain its stellar reputation and strengthen its ties despite the historic civil unrest, a global pandemic, and several high-profile cases. I'm Patrick Yoes, president of the National Fraternal Order Police, and this is The Blue View. Well, Chief, thank you for joining us on A Blue View. If you could, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Patrick, thank you so much. I appreciate, first of all, thank you for your decades of service during difficult times and your leadership that you have provided the entire profession. For that, I'll be eternally grateful. A little bit about me. I am from Minnesota, born and raised, and spent my entire life as a resident of this state in different corners of the state. Started my police officer career in two small towns, Breezy Point and Pequot Lakes in northern Minnesota, and found my way down to the capital city of St. Paul in 1989. And I remember at that time feeling like, I had made it my, mountain moment of wanting to be a St. Paul police officer at that time had been met. And now, 33 years later on the department, never wanting or desiring to be the chief at an earlier age, I find myself now on the sunset of my career and retiring on June 1st after 33 years of service. So it's been a wonderful, amazing, challenging ride over those years. And now I want to spend my chapter 2 helping other organizations and people navigate the crisis that I have endured over the years.
Yeah, Chief, thank you for your years of service. Such a noble profession, and you certainly have left a legacy behind. And I'd like to talk a little bit about one of the things that I think is so vitally important to the success of law enforcement, and that is that you have your approach is that 4 spokes of a wheel. And I think that's what's often lost. If we look at what's happening in our country in the past 18 months, the struggles that we've had, what we see is really a tale of 2 cities. We see cities where there is an adversarial relationship with their law enforcement and the criminal justice system. And then on the other side, you have cities that truly get it. They understand that we're all part of a wheel. And we all have a very important role to play. And when we work together, it's a force multiplier. We have successful and healthy communities. Can you talk a little bit about your strategy and that bank of trust that you've been able to build by having community interaction at a level that helps them understand and appreciate the roles that we all play?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's so important. One thing that I have learned over my career is whether I describe it, sometimes I'll describe it as the spokes that support the wheel. Sometimes I'll describe it as the pillars that support the organization and the community. But it all is under with the foundation of supporting the bank of trust with your community. And I often say that every positive deposit into the bank of trust makes sure that when you have your bad day in your organization or your city, because we all have those bad days, if you don't have a full bank account, you get yourself in trouble real quick. So the 4, I'll just refer to them as pillars today. The community, number 1, the workforce certainly is number 1, right there with it. And then the electeds and the media. Those 4 functions are critically important, not just to a police leader, but also the women and men of law enforcement, whether you are in a member of a union, running a union, running an organization. I've often said that getting the best contracts for your police officers and getting the best contracts for unions is to make sure that those four spokes or those four pillars are attended to, making sure that the community has confidence and trust and a good relationship with the women and men of law enforcement is the best way to get the best working environment and the best way to get the support that we all need more today than ever in the history of policing in this country. We all know the last 2 years specifically have been the worst. But I believe during those times when we're having the worst moments of this profession, there are certainly brighter days ahead. And if you attend to making sure that, if elected officials feel the pressure from the community, that's how you create change. So making sure you're making deposits into the Bank of Trust with the community you serve each and every day, making sure you're making deposits in the Bank of the Trust with the workforce and the media. If the media doesn't trust the words of an organization, you're done, and that just can't be stated enough. You have to be trusted. You can't lie. The truth sometimes is very ugly, but the quicker you get out there and own mistakes, the more credible you become.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. Every challenge we have, every single one of them, a good challenge, or some of our most trying, are really nothing more than opportunities in order to be able to build that trust and examine. I don't think anyone in law enforcement has ever said that we get it right all the time. There's a human element involved in what we do, and as a result, especially when it's non-compliance, there's always going to be an uncertain outcome, and trying to manage those are important for us as a profession to do so in a professional and respectful way. And so you can, I really love the four spokes concept, because I truly do feel that those relationships, you don't foster those at the height of a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
You foster those by doing it repeatedly over time, because it's within the culture of an organization. And we can look across the country and see the agencies in the communities that truly get it. They truly part of a holistic approach in order to address the quality of life in all of our communities. Unfortunately, law enforcement seems to take the brunt of where we fall short in these things, and not all of them are law enforcement related. They have to do with education systems. They have to do with poverty. They have to do with family units. They have to do with a whole lot of things that are really much greater than just a law enforcement component. But they all are key elements to the quality of life. Can you talk about some of the share with us some of the things that the positive qualities that this relationship has given over the years, and how it has transformed the St. Paul Police Department into the agency it is today?
Yeah, so we fortunately, the success of chiefs, as you know, and we've all observed over the years, is really, or any member of the organization, is the success of the shoulders that you stand on, people who came before you in the past. We have a long, strong tradition, history in our department since 1854 in the city of making sure we hire chiefs who have been raised within the culture in the history of our community. The expectations of our department have always been to make sure that we're doing everything we can to build relationships and make sure our community understands we are not the police department. We are your police department. When I became chief, I wanted to take it one step further. So I created the Community Engagement Division. So we had, as most organizations, operations, support services, investigations. So I propped up our Community Engagement Division, which was specifically designed to make deposits into the Bank of Trust. I reflect back to my first day as chief in St. Paul in 2016. We had a very controversial and violent use of force, where a man by the name of Frank Baker was mistaken identity, bit by a canine, kicked in the ribs 3 times, collapsed 2 lungs, broke about 15 ribs. I get a call from the NAACP, somebody who I had spent my career knowing in the department, stating that Mr. Baker was in the hospital. Directly went to the hospital, met with family members. This was 2 weeks before Philando Castile was killed on the north border of St. Paul and Falcon Heights. Little did I know at the time. I think about what would have happened without that relationship, where the president of the NAACP calls me to the hospital and meeting with the family. And Mr. Baker, I'll never forget, had told me at the time, because he knew who I was. He said, "Chief, I can see that dog bite. I can see how that mistake could happen. But man, those kicks were evil." And so I couldn't apologize for what happened. I could apologize because he was in pain and agony, and it was due to an interaction with our police department. But I didn't know what happened yet, so I couldn't apologize for the actions at the time. But I did make a promise that the community members trusted, because of the relationships we built up over the decades of knowing each other, that I would do the right thing and I would follow the evidence. And if we made a mistake, if we did something wrong, we would own it and we would make it right. And in fact, we did. We made a terrible mistake. And Mr. Baker didn't say anything until the press conference that I did, where I announced what happened, showed the body, the dash camera video, and made a public apology to Mr. Baker. And those are the things that can really turn south, where you can have protests in a heartbeat in the community if the community doesn't trust the chief when he or she says, "We will do the right thing."
Yeah, Chief, I think you just illustrated what we talked about at the start of this, that bank of trust is something that built over time. And I think what you've just shown is the fact that an incident occurred, which inevitably, like I said, there's a lot of uncertainty in the jobs that we do, but it was those relationships built over time that allowed you to be able to engage in those meaningful discussions and work through an issue rather than put it in public light and just hash this out and change so many people's opinions, kind of taint people's opinions towards law enforcement. So I appreciate the description you gave. I think we need more of that in law enforcement. I would like to change gears a little bit, because I recently read a letter that you wrote to the city, talking about challenges that are facing your agency, and you have a very strong agency that really does touch all of these spokes that you talk about. A very, very positive running agency, a positive image as well. But at the same time, you're dealing with the same challenges that we're seeing across the country. 2 years of demonization of law enforcement has taken its toll on every agency. And at a time when we're seeing officers retire at a rate much higher than they ever have before, we've seen seasoned officers leaving our profession and taking other jobs just because of the instability that exists within our agencies. And at the same time, trying to find law enforcement officers, the next wave, those best and brightest that are going to be the next ones to shape law enforcement as we move forward. They're just not stepping up and taking the job at a level that we need to. And unfortunately, this is not a problem that fixes itself overnight. We all know that when you hire a law enforcement officer, that we're probably looking at a 4 or 5, maybe even longer year journey before they become an effective officer. So when you lose an experience at a real high rate, and not bringing in anywhere near there, we're causing a whole lot of problems for our profession. Not only are we having manpower shortages, but we also having officer wellness issues because of the lack, the demand that are placed on officers. And reading the letter that you wrote to the city, a very thoughtful approach, recognizing that there has to be stability to the law enforcement profession. Here you are, an agency that really is got all of your everything running in the right direction, but you're still faced with those same challenges. And it just shows that even when you're getting it right, you can still get it wrong if you don't pay attention to the needs. And I really appreciate the tone of your letter and what needed to be said and needed to be heard, and how it affects every agency. If you could talk a little bit about these challenges that you're faced in your community and your agency in keeping the best and brightest on the job to make our community safe.
Yeah, thank you. This is such a trying, historic time in our profession, a time that I never in my wildest dreams would have thought that I would be in a position today as chief where we are losing officers at the rate we are compared to any other time in the past. St. Paul, Minnesota has always had and still has a great reputation of policing in the state. We have been really one of the top two maybe organizations in the state. That's been the destination organization where officers have wanted to come here for years. There were over 1,000 officers who applied for the jobs when I was hired back in 1989. Our last job posting, which just ended recently, we had 99 applicants. Out of that, right now, we're down to 62 people who are eligible to start the background process. So it's really early on. So even if we were in a position where I had budget authority to hire 200 officers, there's no way I could do that at this point. It's just it's terrible. And when I look at over the years of my experience in St. Paul, we would lose one here and one there. Maybe, we lost an officer to maybe the FBI, and actually the officer I'm thinking of with that, he came back to us. He didn't like his time over at the FBI, so we hired him back in a heartbeat. A few others that went to some of the federal agencies or the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, but very, very few. And now, over the last couple of years, we're losing a lot of officers who, have 5, 10, 15 years on the job, who are going to outstate or the suburbs to work in communities. As I talk with them after they leave the organization, they're going to work for more money. They're going to work for more support in some of the communities they are serving. And I have sounded the alarm with our city. And, sometimes that'll ruffle the feathers of some elected officials. But again, getting back to those 4 pillars, if you're attending to the community, in the media, in the workforce, as long as you have 3 of those if you don't lose 3 of the pillars, you're going to be fine. So even when the politicians get upset with you, if your other 3 pillars are supported, you're going to be fine in really raising the dangerous concern that I have of an overworked police department, where more accidents can happen when you have tired officers that can't get a day off, officers who have been without a contract for approximately 800 days now. It's unacceptable. We owe the women and men of law enforcement better than they're receiving now, and I'm going to continue to sound that alarm. Because the fact of the matter is we don't have enough police officers applying for the positions that we need to keep our community safe. And to me, there's nothing more important in a community than making sure they are safe and they feel safe.
Yeah, this is a narrative that we really need to have and nationally in agencies across this country, because we're all struggling. I'm not aware of an agency that does not have a hiring issue right now because of the culture, not culture, but basically the attacks on law enforcement and instability created by many who are more interested in a problem than they were with any type of solution. So we've done irreparable harm. The question is how do we move forward from here? And it takes the articulate approach, just as you've given every one of us. We need to educate the public in the places, each one of our communities, and just how important the quality of life is based on people's on our citizenry's feel of an effective and efficient and empowered and engaged law enforcement agency. Chief, if you could, we're dealing with a crisis. We're dealing with a crisis because our best and brightest in this country are saying there are a whole lot of professions I can go to that are much more stable. It takes a special person, ordinary people, law enforcement officers, ordinary people that are called upon to do some pretty extraordinary things at times. And because of that, it takes a certain disposition, a certain skill set, a certain quality of an individual to take this job at a time when maybe given a whole lot of reasons by a whole bunch of other people that maybe why they shouldn't take it. What would you say from your viewpoint of building these relationships over these years? What would you say to the best and the brightest out there that are entering the workforce and encourage them to come into law enforcement and be that next wave of leaders that help shape the future of law enforcement?
Yeah, that's a great point and a great question. You're right. None of us got into this job to be rich. It takes a special person to be a police officer, and today that the specialness of that is profoundly important. We have evolved in this profession significantly. We have become more accessible, more thoughtful, more connected with our communities across this country. But to me, it comes down to one thing: those who possess the heart for public service are the ones that we need to be reaching out to as much as we possibly can, and encouraging not only our young people to be interested in police officer careers, but we also have to recruit the families, because oftentimes we're trying to get young people from our community who face the profession with a bit of a stigma that they're hearing. And as we build those relationships with our young people, we always also have to build the relationships with the families to make sure they understand that they're going to be okay, and they're going to be working in an environment where they'll be supported and respected. I think about the early recruitment efforts that need to continue to go on. Now's the time to double down on those early recruitment efforts, and you don't have overnight results. You may be looking at, you may have only 2 years left to serve as chief in an organization, or way beyond your time of service in your community. But you have to start young with junior police academies. We started junior police academies back in 2007 with the YWCA in St. Paul, where the kids are exposed to lifting fingerprints from a cup. We bring our crime lab in, and they enjoy that. They get connected with the SWAT team and at the time we had motorcycle unit and visited the mounted unit, and all of the things that this job can provide that there are no other professions out there, where you can have this incredibly fulfilling, dynamic opportunities that just don't exist anywhere else. And trying to get people excited about this career at a young age is so critically important. When I became chief in 2016, we started up the Law Enforcement Career Path Academy, reaching out with our funders and being able to raise over $4 million at the time. I know that's not everybody, can do that or has access to the philanthropic community to be able to do that. But partnering with AmeriCorps, our Century College, our local college and university, we found people who had that heart for service in St. Paul, who had barriers to education, transportation, finances. We brought them in, and they worked with our department for 3 years while we paid for their schooling. And now every academy since, we've had graduates, a total of 21 graduates from our Law Enforcement Career Path Academy. So it may not happen tomorrow, but we all need to do everything we can to be as creative as we possibly can, even if the return on investment is 5 years down the road, because we don't know how long this gap is going to exist. And we also have to make sure our community, our entire community, understands the challenges. Getting people out to offer those ride-alongs are so important. Earlier I mentioned this a bad incident that happened on the first day of the job that resulted in this just horrific, tragic incident. But also making sure on the backside of that, we always say that if you expect your workforce to listen to you when they're wrong, you damn well better back them up when they're right. And I think back to a couple of years ago when one of our officers in the Western District was just driving along on a beautiful afternoon and gets rear-ended from a man who gets out of his car. Thankfully, the officer double tapped the body-worn camera, immediately gets out, and he was attacked with a knife. I mean, viciously, violently attacked with this knife. The officer defended himself and, tragically had to shoot and kill the suspect. Immediately, we have protesters showing up in the street without any knowledge of what happened. And this is where law enforcement leaders, we need to get up sometimes like the umpire out of the dugout and kick up that dust. That's so important for the workforce in the community to see when officers need to be backed up and supported. And during the press conference, I remember one of the things I mentioned is that being a police officer or wearing a badge doesn't make you wrong any more than a protester with a megaphone and it's standing in a street automatically makes you right. And those are the times where we really have to talk to the community and talk to people who want to speak stupidly about things they don't know about. Because without support from leaders in law enforcement, the recruitment problem will never improve without that.
Yeah, these discussions, consensus, and I guess a mutual respect starts with just a single conversation. It has to start somewhere. Every journey starts with the first step. So, well said, Chief. One thing that I really took from the position that you've taken, I think a lot of times in law enforcement, you look at administration, you look at unions, you look at maybe somewhat of an adversarial relationship, and we see them across the country where they lack that connectivity. And your strong words of the need for the men and women of your department to have that stability. In calling for the city to give them a contract and recognize the role they play and the importance of that contract has of providing stability. If you're talking to administrators across this country, just as you articulately gave a great description of what our youth needs to consider in taking our others to coming into this profession, what message would you give to administrators across this country who are dealing with a lot of the same problems?
Well, again, it all gets back to those the four pillars or the four spokes. But making sure one of those spokes, as I mentioned, is the workforce and the union. It's so important to build the relationships and the bank of trust with the union. Without the trust, you'll never get anywhere. You may not always agree. Matter of fact, half the time we're not going to agree on everything. But when you get up from the end of a meeting and you haven't lied to each other, you can shake your hand and acknowledge the differences. But that's so critically important. And at the end of the day, we all have to remember that we truly want the same thing, right? We became police officers because we want people to be safe. We want safe communities. We want the best pay for our officers. We want the best equipment for our officers. We want the best training for our officers. And again, driving home the point of safe communities. And if you attend to the pillars that I speak of or the spokes, we can all do that. I often tell the officers who I connect with, the best way to get the best contract and the best pay is to make sure your community demands it of their elected officials. So that's what we try to do. We need to continue to build that relationship with the people who can put the pressure on the folks writing the checks in our cities.
Chief, congratulations! Just what a great career, and certainly have left your mark on a profession. And thank you for your years of service, and wish you the absolute best in your next chapter in your life. If someone wants to learn a little bit more about the St. Paul Police Department and the programs that you have, what would be the best way for them to go about getting that information?
So you could just Google stpaul.gov, or as I'm going to be here about 6 more weeks before I retire, I'm going to give you my personal email address. Anybody would like to connect with me, this is the best email. It's Todd, TODD, .Axtell, AXTELL, @gmail.com. Please give me shoot me an email. I'm available to bounce ideas off of, help in any way I possibly can, because we all are in this together. Anything I can do to help support officers, deputies, troopers, chiefs, and sheriffs, I'm here for you.
Well, Chief Axtell, thanks you. Thank you for all you do. Congratulations again. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in to the Blue View, where we talk about the issues that are so vitally important to the men and women who suit up and show up to communities all across this country every day and protect and serve those that we've sworn to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of The Blue View, hosted by Patrick Yoes, National President of the Fraternal Order of Police. To catch our next episode, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. To get the latest from the National FOP, make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at GLFOP and on Instagram at FOP National. Thanks again. See you next time.